Okay, this week's parsha, Beshalach, the parsha Shira, Shabbos Shira. A few different inyanim. It says the Shira begins with the word Oz Yoshir Moshe, Bnei Yisrael. So there's a Chazal that says that why did Moshe Rabbeinu begin the Shira with the word Oz? So he said because in the end of parsha Shmuz, he complained to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the word Oz. He said, Oz Basi El Parai. From the time I came to Parai, things got worse for the Yidden. We know the story at the end of Parshas Shmuz. So he says, he wanted to correct that now. He says that since I complained with the word Oz, so now I'm going to be Misakin and sing Shir with the word Oz. So I just wanted to understand a little better. Okay, it's the same words. It's nice. It's like sort of a remez, but a little deeper meaning in this. How was he Misakin here with the Oz? What do you complain about there with that Oz? Sometimes we see things and come about that look difficult for a person, a Torah for a person, a disappointment for a person, and then at the end, down the road, you see that it was a toiva. What happened? It's something it was upsetting at the time, but later on, you sometimes was zeicha to see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had a good kavanah in this, and something good came out of it. So that's really what happened by Kriyas Yamsuf, when the Mitzrayim were running after the Yidden. It was terrible. They're standing by the Yam. There's nowhere to run. There's the Yam, and the Mitzrayim are catching up, and it's all over. That's why they felt it was terrible for them. They were crying. They said they lifted their eyes. They were scared. There weren't enough graves in Mitzrayim. Took us to the Midbar. Believe us, he said, let us stay here. So it was a tremendous nisayon for Yidden to see the Mitzrayim coming after them and the Yam in front of them. But as we know, the Yam split, which made the Kriyas Yamsuf, and this was the end of the Mitzrayim. That HaKadosh Baruch told Moshe Rabbeinu, don't be afraid. Like you see Mitzrayim today, you're not going to see them again. This was the biggest taiva for them, that the Mitzrayim came after them, and they were finally destroyed. The whole army of Pari was destroyed in the Yamsuf. So then Moshe Rabbeinu sang the Shira, Oz Yoshir Moshe, Bnei Yisrael. So that this Oz corrected the previous Oz, because then what happened was, in a way, a similar thing happened. Moshe Rabbeinu, at the time, Moshe came to Pari to help the Yidden, and instead Pari made the Avodah worse. And Moshe Rabbeinu complained. He said, "Mios Basio Pari, he made it worse. What happened?" But really, it was a taiva, because the Chazal explained that there was supposed to be 400 years in Mitzrayim, and it was only 210. So there was a Koshia Shibud, because the work got so much more difficult. That was mashlim the years and made it able for them to leave Mitzrayim. Otherwise, it was almost Memtes Sharituma, and HaKadosh Baruch was helping them. It was hard at the time. They suffered hard work and they complained. They have what they're supposed to understand. It's a tremendous sign a person sometimes goes through. Everything will look just the opposite. It's supposed to get out. We're getting it worse. We got out of Mitzrayim. They're chasing us. Things happen that seem mamish opposite of what we expect to happen. And the person has to have such a munah that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is doing everything with toiv. But here Moshe Rabbeinu saw it, Klal Yisrael saw it. So Oz Yoshir Moshe, he said, this Oz, I'm correcting the Oz that I complained then. Because Oz is also an Indian of time. Oz then, may Oz Basi Apari, at that time it looked terrible. So Oz Yoshir Moshe is using this word Oz, that you can't look at the time that you're in necessarily, or you have to have a munah that even that time is a good time, that it's all the toiv. We have to have that amunah, that's how it really is, and that's what happened by the Shira, by Oz Yoshir. There's the Indian of we have by we'll come on from Oz Yoshir. It says here after the Shira, after Kriyas Yamsuf, they ran into another problem. They went 3 days and they didn't find any water. So then they came to a place Mara, and the water was bitter there. And they named the place Mara, and they complained. Itzagal Hashem. So I think Moshe cried out to Hashem, and Hashem showed him a stick. He threw it into the water, and V'imtikol Mayim became sweet. Sham Sam Leichayku Mishpat Hashem Nisol. So there, in that same place, in Mara, the Eibusha gave certain halachas to Klal Yisrael. And Rashi says that they gave mixes Parshas HaTorah, Shabbos, Paraduma, Dinin, certain halachas to Klal Yisrael. So I just want to share a word that I heard from Shnei a few times. Shnei Kapla said this word a few times. I heard it from him. He said he has the kasha here that bothered him. He said this is a tremendous thing that occurred, that Hashem gave mitzvahs to Klal Yisrael. This is before Mount Torah. They came out of Mitzrayim, and Hashem gives them mitzvahs. Paradum, Shabbos. You would expect a whole parsha about this somehow. Like there should be a big event here that should introduce this, that Hashem spoke to Moshe, and they're getting mitzvahs. And it's here just thrown in. Derech Agav, it talks about in this place, they cried to Hashem, and Hashem had given a nes. Yitzchak al Hashem, Vayira Hashem ate, V'yashlech al hamayim, V'yimtuk mayim. The water became sweet. Sham, in that same place, some leichayku mishpat of Sham Niso, and over there, that's where it happened. He gave him some mitzvahs. Why is the Torah bringing it in such a oif, in such a way that Reb Shnei used to bother him a lot, this kasha? So he said pshat like this. He said that they had a problem at the moment. The water was bitter. So for that problem, there was a eitzah to throw the stick in the water. But Reb Shnei said, what's going to be in the future when things are bitter for a person? People go times that are bitter. So the pasuk for Zayis, there's mitzvahs. Sham, in that same place, the same time that he gave a stick to sweeten the water, he gave something that could always sweeten the person's life. Sham Sam Leichayku Mishpat Hashem. So there he gave Torah, he gave some Torah mitzvahs, like Shashuai, there's things that can make a person, even in the hard situations, a person has mitzvahs, it could give a person a simcha, a sweetness, and to sweeten his life. And we know there are such people that even in difficult situations, but they have a simcha, it gives them the Torah, and it gives them the simcha to carry through difficult times. I remember there was one of the Ger Rebbe's, the Play Menachem. He lost a very chashuv son in a car accident. The bus hit him, and it was very difficult for him. But he wrote a sefer at that time, and I think called Taras Shashuai. He wrote that's the name of the sefer. He wrote a small sefer that the Torah gave him the koyach to go weiter, to pull through the sign that he had. So but there's a Ramban. The Bel Yishvei brings a Ramban on this opinion of it. What happened here in Mara that Hashem gave him Chayku Mishpat Hisham Nisol. So the Ramban says, he said it was to train them in mitzvahs. And he said to them, this is what Ramban brings, that also the Kodesh Baruch Hu Tzav Bekach, you're going to have these mitzvahs are going to be in the Torah, Shabbos and Paraduma, and Hayezek Kedei Largilam b'mitzvahs. It was a training situation, and to know in Ladas Mikabel Oisim b'Simcha b'Tov Levav, and that's what the pasuk says. Chayku Mishpat Sham Nisohu. It was sort of a test, trying sort of giving a little bit of the Torah, see how you do with the Torah. So he says, and he explains that these are important mitzvahs. Shabbos is a yisoid of Amunah, and then he says, Paradum is showing that sometimes we don't understand, and we have to listen to Hashem. So these are the mitzvahs that Hashem chose. And he says a little bit more to Ramban that now they're going to go into the midbar, into difficult matzav, into going into a travel through a midbar. So he's teaching them certain ways, chayka mishpat, certain inyanim of derech eretz, that he wanted Klal Yisrael to learn how to behave in the midbar. So he says, and they're going to have to suffer with hunger and thirst and so on. So they should call out to Hashem. They shouldn't have tinus. They should. He says. Ramban says a few inyanim here that Kadosh Baruch Hu, I don't know how the Ramban learns it out exactly where he gets it, but he says he taught them mishpatim sheyichyu behem, how they should live in a midbar. One is lehav ish esraeov. They should be to love for each other. Another one is to listen to the Zakanim. There's an Indian of Hatznias in the tents, and they should have. And then he mentions here they should act with shalom to people who come to sell them things in the midbar. People, merchants or whatever, peddlers come, and they shouldn't be like other people that travel in the midbar that do all ta'evos, have no embarrassment, like we see in Nebuch today, these chayas. But we should be a disciplined, normal people, even in the midbar. That's what he was trying to tell them how their cheres. So the Bel Yishvei here mentions also that one of the mitzvahs that the guy in the Morag, Rashi didn't bring it here, was kibbut avayim. Says it was in Stavah B'Mara. So he says that I'm going to put a part of what the Bel Yishvei speaks here. I'm going to Indian of minig bezoyin, he calls it, not to act with bezoyin, to act with their covered. So he brings that he somehow now jumps to the end of Parshas Yisrael in the Shmuz to one of his key examples that he says that the Torah says in the end of Yisrael, when you have a mizbeach, you should have a ramp going up to mizbeach, not steps. Why shall you see God? Last passing Yisrael, you shouldn't uncover your erva over the steps going up to the mizbeach. If you go up the steps, you have to lift your foot, whatever it is. So he says that the Rashi brings here a limud. He says, Advarim kal v'chayma. We're supposed to learn kal v'chayma from this halacha. Ma avanim halola. We're talking about walking up stones. Shein bem das lahakpid al b'zyonim. They don't have any understanding to feel embarrassed that how we stepped on them, we lifted our foot, and Amr Torah, still as Torah says, Hoil v'yesh b'hem tzarech, we need these steps. Lo yisinig b'hem minig b'zayin, don't treat them with minig b'zayin. This is the phrase Rebbe Yeshivas is discussing minig b'zayin. So chavercha, shu b'dmus yaitzucha, a friend, another person that's the mus of Kadosh Baruch Hu, and makla b'zayin, and he's sensitive to b'zayin, achas kama v'kama. Surely we have to be careful not to embarrass or treat a person in the wrong way. So he brings here that we see from the Torah, not only do we have to have covered for people, we have to have covered even for stones that we need them. We step when we walk on them. So he brings he calls it, this is his hergish, Bel Yishvei, a maisa nifla. You can tell us now a murdik maisa. When I saw these words, I got it ready. And it's a maisa nifla. So he says that this maisa nifla is in the Shita Mekubetzis in Baba Kama, that Tzadik Beis on the base. A story about the Rif. We all learned the Rif in the back of the Gemara is the Rav Alphas. I don't know too many stories about the Rif. So now you're going to hear a story about in the Shita Mekubetzis. So he says that once he was sick, and he stayed by somebody who had a merchatz in his house. He had, I guess those days he didn't have it, so not everybody had a merchatz in his house. This person must have been a wealthy person, and he had somewhere to bathe in his house. And the Rif was ill, so he needed this. This helped him heal, and he used this merchatz, and he had enough from it until he became healthy, staying by this person. Some time passed, and this person went down in Parnasa, and he had to sell his house, his merchatz, to pay off his debt. So they asked, or they came to the Rif that he should be the Rav to help work this out, to work out the sale, or who should have it, or something. So Rebbe Yishvei's Medayik, they didn't ask him to paskin if the merchatz is a kosher mikvah, nishkan kosher mikvah. It wasn't a halachatik shayla. They wanted to know on the bailus how they should divide, who should get something about the bailus, who owns it. But this is the Mardik Amaisa. The Rif answered, he says, I'm not going to get involved in anything about this merchatz. Not about the sale, not about its value, because I had benefit from this merchatz. That's the end of the story. There's the Mardik Amaisa. That he said, in other words, he had such a covet for this merchatz that he benefited from it. I can't get involved with this, talking about this merchatz. Don't get me into this. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I tell you the truth, I don't really understand it fully. I'm just reading it, what was so terrible he had to do. But somehow that's what he's bringing out. It's a Maisa Nifla. He was the spoil from this Maisa. America's like, let's say, let's go a swimming pool that I swam in and I got healthy. I did exercise in that swimming pool. I can't be involved in anything about this Merchitz. That's the end of the story. So you see how much their Cheretz, so that's what he wants to bring out, he had for this Merchitz that he bathed in. That's what he wants to bring out. So he goes back to the Rashi, and he says, he had very beautiful diak, Rebel Yishvein, in the Rashi. If I would ask you, he says, why shouldn't we step on these stones with lifting our leg? It's there, so he said, because the Mizbeach, it's a walking Kaddish, talking about walking on the Mizbeach. You got to be careful, how you walk in the Mizbeach. But Rashi doesn't say that, he says, Ma'avanim halol she'ein bem das lahakbel b'zyonim. The stones, they don't care. But the Torah says, here it is, Harel v'yesh bem tzayrich. Since you need them, like tinning bem minig b'zoyin. It doesn't say about they're holy, so you shouldn't treat it with b'zoyin. He says it's something you use. Something you use, you shouldn't be mavaza. That's what Yeshivas is medayik here. So he says that we have to give covet to things that we use. He says. Then he brings from Rabbi Rucham that speaks about this, Rashi. Rucham Vavat Mashgiach. And he says a number of things, but he says this involves everything in life. He says, he gives an example. I don't know why I picked this example again, but he says our gloves. He says, we have gloves that we use to warm our hands. It's a machaya, he says. We have to machshiv the gloves to give them covet. He says, I guess don't throw your gloves around, You have to use your gloves, so put it down nicely, he says. About clothing, B'chlal, he says that we have to appreciate our clothing. I once heard that there was the Mordechai Schwab, I think his name was, the Mashgiach in Muncie. It's a big Balmusa. So I once heard a story, more or less. The story was that he had a beggar that he had to throw out already. He wore it till it was he couldn't use it anymore. It's a jacket. So he folded it nicely and he wrapped it. He put it in a bag, another bag. But still, he threw it in the garbage with a gansa vaida. Like he didn't say, I wore this jacket, so I couldn't just throw it out. So that's what he's talking about here, really. He says. Then he talks about B'zayin Eichlin. There's halachas about it, not to throw around food, and so on. And the Rebbe Yishvei here mentions, it could be this old from Rebbe Rucham, some of these examples. I didn't double check. He says, Svarim, someone told me, just recently, he was wondering, he asked me my opinion. He says he learns at a certain yeshiva, and there's someone that gets paid to collect the Svarim. They have, big yeshivas, they have, someone goes with a wagon, and he sees the guy throw the Svarim. Like he picks up the save, he throws it onto the thing. So he asked me if I think he should say something to the guy, So I told him, if you feel you could say something to the guy, say something to the guy. Because it's takarun, in other words, it's a bizayin. To throw svarim, that's a bizayin. The Bel Yishvez says even to leave svarim in piles, he says you see piles of svarim, you shouldn't leave them like that. It's not a cover svarim. I guess there's different levels of how sensitive a person feels, but just the concept to have covet for things that we use, and especially if it's a davar kaddish. And then he says, not only for a yid, talking about having covet for people, not only for that's one of the things the Ramban mentioned. The people that come to sell, come to the Machne Yisrael, they should be shown. They should be nice to them. So he says, not only is because it's Tzelem Lekim, he says, but Hoyel V'Yeshem Tzayrich. And he says that he says Yeruchim said that we benefit a lot from the farmers that bring in all the vegetables to sell. He says, if they wouldn't come in with the vegetables, we'd be missing out on basic things we need. So he says. He said. Rabbi Yochum said, if I wasn't embarrassed, he concluded, he quotes here, I would go to be makabel panim these farmers with musical instruments. He said, okay, he didn't do it. He said he'd be back, but he said, in other words, he's trying to bring out the hergish. We get delivery trucks, things, they bring things, the hergish of appreciation and covet. He says. And then he says a little later, it's a long shmuz here, he says that if that's we have to have covet and appreciation, so how much you have to have for a yeshiva, he says. That we're in a yeshiva, what a yeshiva does for us, and b'nei yeshiva, to have covet, kiva is talmidim, because they didn't have covet zelazeh. He says, let's say a person would be sitting himself in a bes medrash all alone, it's not so geschmack. He said the fact that there's other chaverim, you have to appreciate that you have chaverim that are here also, the other people learning. So he says these are midas that the Torah is trying to teach them, that's where he's marach in this Indian of covet years. Also want to speak a little bit about Parshas Mon. We had this week, this is about the Mon. So I'll share a little bit I saw, and I have a sefer Marpa Loshin, that's from Rafael Hamburger. He said he lived around late 1700s, I think. Big going. So he speaks about a little bit. He ties in the Indian of the Mon. What he's focusing on is with the Mon is the Indian of Betachin. That Parnasa, just like the Mon came in the Shemayim, 40 years, the Yidden survived. David gave Mon. That we're supposed to learn from there, Muna and Betachin and Indian of Parnasa particularly. So he says that many averas that people do, especially Ben Chavera, is because of Miyat Betachin B'Hashem, he says. Particularly, I guess, mainly from my financial avlos, because people don't believe enough that everything is Min HaShemayim, that their panas is Hashem fixed a certain amount for each person for the year, and there's no reason to cheat or steal or whatever, machlekes and other kinds of things. And he says that we learn that from the Mon, because by the Mon, one of the lessons Hashem said that everyone had his chelek that was supposed to be for him. If you took more, you came home, there wasn't any more, there wasn't anything extra. If you took less, you didn't lose out. Because everything is from Min HaShemayim. So he says, the pasuk says by the Mon, I'm going to give you bread from the Shemayim. Every day they should go out and collect the portion. I'm going to test you. So he wants to touch this pasuk derech remez. It's going on all parnasa. He says how a person should live all the time. That a person should know, ani mamtlechem lechem min hashemayim. That the lechem is min hashemayim. And b'yatom lektiv aviyem b'yayim. L'man anasenu. The whole thing, it's all in the soyin that how things are. We have to do things and how we're going to go about making parnasa and so on. It's all in the soyin, but the lechem min hashemayim. He says that person panos min hashemayim. So he says, and he says, I'm just going to read some of the words that he writes about this. He says, "Ini mamtulchem lechem min hashemayim. Kloimar, kol ma shemegil lechem. Whatever you have, al tachshavu ki hasibu is garmu. Don't think it came because I have the store, I have this business. El shu nigzu min hashemayim." And he says, "Yes, zeh shama kosev yatzam v'laktu v'ayim b'yayimai." So he says, we have to go out and pick it, he says. We have to do something, he says. But the pasuk fears us, L'man anasenu. It's in the soyin. He says, Ma shechayev Hashem yisborach es adam shisasik asibas. Hashem wants people to go to work, to do things, to make hishtadlus. But it's all in the soyin, he said. L'man anasenu. And then he says that if a person does go to work, he says, Torah doesn't want that he shouldn't do anything, he says. I guess there's an exception, we'll go into that now, but he says, but if a person goes with proper hashkafa, that he knows it's from Hashem, and just Hashem wants him to do his ishtadlus, so he says, Kavanu shlo yesha batul v'yisas klal. V'myasa kain, if he does what Hashem wants, yachshveh Hashem leila mitzvah. Afilu mashu oisik b'siba. Even when he does his business, Hashem will look at it as a mitzvah if he has the right hashkafa about it. He says, and he has that because Vava speaks about this. A person shouldn't feel that, let's say, a person is successful in a certain business, that he's dependent on this business. If he wouldn't have this business, he wouldn't have the panasa. Hashem has many ways to give a person panasa. But then he says an important thing about the union of Maisris, that a person, luxuries and so on. He says that he brings the Mishnah Pekavis, Kachi Darka Shel Torah, Pas B'Melech Teichel, that a person should be satisfied with Pas B'Melech Teichel, Maim Shvatishta. So he says, Harem is who, what are Chazal trying to teach us? He says, Ikra Godel, again he chazes over that the main Ikra is Shemei Yisrael L'Torah Hu B'Tachin. The person has to have B'Tachin. V'ina Misha B'Ter B'Shem Karoi, but someone who has B'Tachin, Mistapik, B'Mesh Nasan L'Hashem, he's satisfied with whatever Hashem gives him. Rab Ma'at, Fishigaz Hashem Baruch Hu. The Ein Roidev Acha Maisris. He's not running after all the luxuries. And he says, Bater, he brings Chavas Abavas, Bater B'Lakim Ein Enu Doirish L'Yaisim Yiteref Yaimai. He doesn't even worry about what's going to be tomorrow. He says, and so on. And he says, Misha Roidev Acha Maisris, someone who's looking for all the extras to catch up, like to follow the whatever someone else has. He doesn't any yachal of Torah b'Hashem karoi. So he says, listen to these words. He says, Ki ha'adam yesh lo Torah b'Hashem shitim lo deis fukai avoloi al moisres. He says, betachin does not mean moisres. So he says, this big person writing this, that betachin means we can rely on Hashem that He'll provide for us a normal life, normal things that person needs. But you can't say I rely on Hashem. I'm surely going to have the fanciest car, the fanciest home. That's not what it's supposed to. That's not betachin. He says. He says, that's what Chazal say. Pas B'Melech Teichel. He says that's what they're trying to say. That to stick to a person should be happy with a modest way of living, not looking for things to get attention and so on. And he says that's the taich of the Chazal say lenitna Torah el oich liman. So he says because oich liman represents the union of betachin. That Torah only is the person has betachin, and then that person is able to learn Torah. He says that goes together. Just maybe one more word I have on some word in the parsha that it says here by the Shira. It says that after Moshe Rabbeinu sang the Shira with Klal Yisrael, so then it says about Miriam. Atika Miriam Anavia, Miriam the Neviah Achais Aaron as a taif b'yada. She took a drum, I think. But and all the ladies came out. They followed Miriam with music and with dancing. And Miriam said, So there's a little shver, just to duke him here, that we know who Miriam is. We had Miriam is already mentioned in the Torah. Everyone knows who Miriam is. And here the Torah introduces her, Atika Miriam Hanavia Achais Aaron. So first of all, where's the nevuah here? Did she say nevuah? She repeated the same pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu said. And what Achais Aaron, like where did that come from? I think actually Rashi says a pshat in this, that it's referring to that she said nevuah when she was only Achais Aaron. Before Moshe Rabbeinu was born, that's what they're saying. But it had a different pshat. I just want to share with you. It says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu first told Moshe Rabbeinu that he should go to speak to Pari, so he said, I'm kvad peh, I can't speak to you. It's hard for me to talk. How am I going to go speak to Pari? So the pasuk says that that he'll speak for you. So there's a pasuk here that says that Aaron Achicha Yeh Neviecha. Pasuk says he'll be your navi. So what does it mean? He'll be your navi. That could be a navi. So navi, so you see from here, navi could mean someone who can express what another person is trying to say and say it. He'll be the spokesman for you. He'll be your navi. He'll be your speaker. So navi doesn't have to mean like we always say. He'll be your prophet. He'll be your speaker. He'll the words that you're going to say that are difficult to hear, he'll bring them out. Mm-hmm. So here, I think I once heard that from maybe from Reb Nosson even, that what Miriam did here, and that's what Noshim do. Let's say if you had to set a table for Shabbos, it wouldn't look the way ladies set a table for Shabbos. They have a koyach to make it, to beautify it, to make things covered in a nice way. So Moshe Rabbeinu sang the Shira, but the Ticha Miriam HaNeviah, Neviah here means to bring out the words nicer, achais Aaron, just like Aaron did. Just like Aaron did to take Moshe Rabbeinu's words. And what did she do here? Achais Aaron. She took out a little lady, Besufim Mchailis. They took the same shira, but they had music with it, they danced with it. They took the shira, that's what the Torah is telling us. That's what Miriam did. Miriam HaNeviah, achais Aaron, she took Moshe's shira and she made it into a real something really special. That's what maybe the Torah means over here. Okay.
No.